Welcome, everybody. This is an enormous pleasure to have a very special talk today by Scott Kennedy. Scott's going to talk about China's tech trajectory, latest developments, and implications for the U.S. I'm Barry Naughton. I'm the So-Kwan Lug Professor here at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego. And we got a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to cut the introductions really short and just move right into them. But let me introduce Scott real quickly. Scott Kennedy has been a leading light in the study of Chinese political science, business, and economics for more than a decade. First got to know Scott when he had just completed a really interesting body of work on Chinese business and the relationship between Chinese business and lobbying organizations and Chinese government, really trying to he really added some perspective and some nuance into how we understood those relationships. At that time, he was professor at the University of Indiana. He's since moved to CSIS, the prominent Washington think tank, and he's produced a remarkable body of work on Chinese industrial policy and the interface between, again, politics, business, and the economy, but with a very different perspective. I would say just recently, Scott has emerged as a I think I'd say a pioneer, a pathbreaker, in terms of trying to reestablish a set of relations between the United States and China, maybe based on science, maybe based on social science, maybe based on diplomatic understandings that would give us an opportunity to stabilize the relationship and perhaps make some modest improvements. So it's an enormous pleasure to have Scott here. And with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Scott to take over.
Well, thank you, Barry, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's great to be back on the campus. Most of you are too young to remember when I visited here in 2005 for 6 months and really enjoyed myself. I had an office right across the way on the second floor. Unfortunately, it looked in the wrong direction. It looked at the ocean. It makes it very difficult to work. I don't know how you get anything done here with views like that. But I had a great time, and it was when I got to spend more time with Barry, Steph Haggard, and others here. I think at that time, Melanie Hart was a student who's gone on now. She's at the State Department, and that time for me was really valuable, and it enriched my life since. And so I'm delighted to have the chance to talk about issues of common concern, things that we all pay attention to. This is today what I want to talk about is a little bit travel log, a little bit serious questions about where China is headed. And as Barry said, I've been trying to continue to rebuild the scholarly relationship between the U.S. and China. And that's been not an easy task, given the trajectory of the overall official relationship and so many other things. And so, but I've mostly done that by getting jet lag and enjoying alone time in quarantine, which has been a benefit to me. It's also was a benefit to my wife, who was sick of me being at home so much. But I've now I went to China in the fall of 2022 for 7 weeks then, and I've gone on 5 more trips since then, trying to just simply do what I used to do and what we should do, which is doing field work, meeting people, and trying to do as normal work of scholars that we can, because you've got to be able to collect data. You've got to have different ways to collect data. You have to engage in conversation with people about data and policy. And so for me, that means getting out, because and it'll come up today, the sort of core question that I've settled on, and Barry, I appreciate the description of sort of the arc of my work, is trying to measure the distance between Chinese economic policy and Chinese commercial performance. And so to actually understand both sides of that equation, going to China helps. to understand why they've got certain policies, and then to actually measure their performance. You could read people's daily, and you could look at numbers on your computer screen to get both sides of that. But I don't trust either of those two. I think I may even trust the computer screen less than the people's daily. But just traveling is also fun. And I am a sucker for a factory tour. And I think most people have multiple ways in which you learn, right? And so reading, talking to people, visiting, seeing things, comparison of China with other places, all of those help me get my arms around this very complicated country and its relationship with the rest of the world. So today I want to talk about two things in particular and then try and pull them together. The first is where is China going technologically? And the second is what's the mood in China and where is it going and what's it mean for the rest of us? And then put those two things together, see if we can come up with a macro picture of China that might help us think about where it's going for more than 5 minutes, because we tend to have very short-term conclusions. I live in Washington, D.C., and we do groupthink. We're now all convinced that China's economy is going over a cliff. A few months ago, we all thought it was going to rule the world. And in a few months, people will change their mind again. So let's see if we can come up with some kind of framework to think about that gets us through the ups and downs, through my tourism. So I went to 5 cities on this most recent trip, and I started in Shanghai. And so this was a little over 3-week trip, and Shanghai's the easy place to get to because it's got a nice big airport. But for the first time, I was able to not just go to Shanghai and Beijing. I went to other places, and so I'll talk about those as well because those are important. If just getting to China in and of itself is important. And we've got people from Shanghai here, like Erming, but you need to get to other places, right? So I run, and so one of the things that helps me do is get around cities. I can't travel between cities running. I'm not crazy, but I can get out and about, and I can see what things look like on the ground while I'm sweating and suffering. But in Shanghai. I visited some companies. You may know of Fosun. It's a very large Chinese private conglomerate, and I've known people there for a long time. But I spent a particular amount of time on this trip with Fosun Pharma, with the CEO of Fosun Pharma, because Fosun is for a long time just made generic drugs, and they're a big generic maker. But they actually are now innovating, and their innovations rub up against global interests and US-China political tensions. But I also went to this is Huawei's showroom, their main flagship store in downtown Shanghai on Nanjing East Road. And if you had really good vision, you could see that this is the phones that everyone's freaked out about. This is the Mate 60 Pro. It's the one that's got the chip in there that we thought that they couldn't make. And they're selling those like hotcakes. But the coolest thing about this store was not the phone stuff, it was everything else. Because Huawei is not just a phone company or a telecom company. They are putting their technology into autonomous vehicles that are, at least from their looks, extremely snazzy. And they are investing a lot in that entire technology stack.
So Scott, what's the brand on that EV?
So this is, I forget the name of this. So it's not a Huawei car. They provide the IT system in this car. But
That's exactly the one you mentioned, the Wenjie.
yeah. So that's that Wenjie M5. And so I guess that's Hongmeng Zhixing, so like a Hongmeng auto, like autonomous vehicle. In any case, so let me just give you the big story first on tech, which is 7 years ago, I wrote a report called the Fat Tech Dragon that we published at CSIS that said there are a lot of really interesting Chinese companies that are doing reasonably well in products that are commodified. They're not really serious innovators, but they can do some application innovation. And once you can commodify those things, then they're very good at making a lot of something. And that's where the Chinese were doing well, but it's very inefficient because you have a very wasteful system. So hence a fat tech dragon, very inefficient technology dragon. So I'm going back to compare, and what I come away with from this trip, and as we're seeing as we're going through the slides, is China's better. Just raw technology capabilities better than a decade ago, and I think significantly better. Not just on minor applications, but in significant applications that change the basic structure of markets. And that these companies really have a very good sense of what their capabilities are, what their weaknesses are, who their primary competitors are domestically, globally, what the changing nature of international politics means for them. These companies have a very keen sense of where they are. These companies don't think with a mindset like a central administrative agency. They think like global business people. And they have staff that are global. These are not, when we call them Chinese companies, it's because of where they're headquartered and where a lot of their money comes from. But if you look at who works for them and where their technology comes from and how they do business, they are global companies. This is the global share of battery EV production and Chinese companies dominate. You all have heard of CATL, Ningde Shidai, company in Fujian, who you probably wouldn't have heard of 10 years ago, unless you really knew something about this industry. I didn't go to Fujian, but I did go to Changzhou to visit S-Volt, which has 1.8% of global market share. That looks pretty teeny, but they are a very interesting company. They are originally a subsidiary of a Chinese company called Great Wall Auto, which is in Baoding, just outside Beijing, founded by this private entrepreneur, Mr. Wei. And he originally created this company, but then they split. And so it's a wholly independent company now. This gentleman to my side is the CEO, and invited me for a tour and for intensive discussion. 95% automation in this factory. They have a tour to see how everything is made and also where they sit in the market and the technology. And some people criticize them as their products aren't quite as good. They're not quite as efficient as CATL. Again, I'm a sucker for a factory tour. So I was impressed compared to what I was expecting. They have 10 factories around China. They have 2 in Germany. They have 1 in Thailand. And they know exactly where they sit relative to everybody else and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so I went to see them in Changzhou, which is up the river from Shanghai in Jiangsu. And Changzhou is a small town of 3 million people you've never heard of, unless you really follow, but folks who work on China would know. After the tour and time there, we went to a shopping mall, and this is a Lixiang car. It's got the nice Huawei logo in the store behind it, but this is like in the middle of the shopping mall if you wanted to go sit. And I got to go, I sat in the car and checked it out. There are so many different brands of Chinese EVs now. It's very difficult to keep track of them. Changzhou just has got all of these factories all over. It's like a cluster for EVs and batteries and that supply chain. So if you wanted to build an EV, you could just be in that part of Jiangsu, and you could get everything from the head to the tail of the car. I then went off to Nanjing, upriver a little bit, and visited the Hopkins Nanjing Center, where I studied a long time ago. And the place is doing really well. When I needed to go to the airport or to the train station to go to my next stop, this really nice car picked me up. This is, I think, a BYD. And this looks like this, their info systems beat my Honda info system hands down. And maybe that's not saying much, but there's so much competition. Everyone is competing for the look inside the car. That's now, it used to be how many cup holders was in a car. That's what mattered. And now it's that look, it's that feel. People want to feel like they are in, driving a spaceship, but that is easy to drive. So I went, my next stop was Wuhan. And that's the #1 bridge that crosses the Yangtze. If you remember, Mao said he crossed the swam across the Yangtze in Wuhan. The distance between where I'm standing and the other side, bank to bank, is exactly 2/3 of a mile. He was 77 years old when he supposedly did that on July 15th of 1966. I don't think he did it. I don't think he did. This is the other side. The cherry blossoms were coming out in mid-March there. So Wuhan was just crawling with tourists. And I went to Wuhan University. It took forever just to get on campus because it's so beautiful. But I visited 2 companies when I was in Wuhan. One's called Waterstone, and the other is called Yangtze Memory. People probably have heard of the one on the right, maybe not the one on the left, but they're both super interesting for different reasons. Waterstone is actually founded by one of my former colleagues from Indiana University, a chemist who was in the chemistry department, but also worked at Eli Lilly up the road in Indianapolis. He decided he didn't want to work at Eli Lilly any longer. He didn't want to be middle management. So he went and he got some money, opened a contract research organization to do clinical trials in Kunshan and in Beijing, and made that a very successful company working for big pharma doing clinical trials. Sold that company and then created Waterstone, which does its own drug discovery on drugs related to cancer. Waterstone is the name of the neighborhood he lived in Indianapolis. So that's it. It has nothing to do with China or Buddhism or anything like that. This is just an Indianapolis neighborhood. It's the source of the name of the company. And everyone who works in that company has a global education and work experience. And all of their ties are global. Yangtze Memory is China's national champion for memory. This is their chairman, Mr. Chun, who spent a long afternoon with me. They have come out of nowhere to compete headlong with SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron in making memory. He walked me through the progress that they've made. They're still not up to where their competitors are. But one reason is because in October of 2022, they were put on the US entities list. So we had a very interesting discussion about how horrible a decision that was from their perspective and how wrong and unfair it was. And so they kvetched for a long time about the US government with a lot of specifics about that. I think their basic view is the US is not trying to create a small yard with a high fence, but many large yards with very high fences, and just simply to limit China's ability to do well in this sector. I went from Wuhan to Beijing, and in Beijing, I spent time with many different folks, including Xiaomi. You might know Xiaomi because it makes cell phones and tablets and IT products that everyone is familiar with. Starting on March 27th, they make electric vehicles. They came out with one when their most similar, like peer American competitor, Apple, decided not to. I got to test drive this thing and see the entire factory production and talk to them. This is a serious car. And the reason they can do it is because it's an electric motor. Internal combustion engine was a big problem and a block for everyone. But with the electric motor, allows you to leapfrog across all of those obstacles that used to keep everybody out. Xiaomi is now, though, the 151st electric vehicle maker in China. And so, but in the first few weeks, they got 75,000 orders, and they have a chance to sell hundreds of thousands of cars every year. So, yes.
Can I ask a question about Tesla in China? So recently there's this news about Tesla and the autonomous driving
Yes.
in China, and they're going to start that. It seemed like a bad idea because in the past, one can argue that some innovations have been learned by the Chinese
Sure.
in China and then utilized. So why is Tesla doing, and how does Tesla fit into this enormous market for EVs in production?
Well, Tesla helped jumpstart a lot of this. Some of the people that work for Xiaomi and the others used to work at Tesla. But also Tesla has just been a target because it's been there. They've been able to learn from it. They use many of the same suppliers. Tesla has helped those suppliers become better. And so it's kind of pulled along the rest of the industry. Tesla, I mean, Tesla thinks China's market is very important because it's 6 times the size of our market.
Yeah, it's creating 6 times the competition, or
Yes,
even
yes,
10 times.
But I don't know, when I look at Elon Musk, I don't see someone who's really fearful about others. I see someone who thinks he is able to compete against everybody. And that's what you run into with entrepreneurs all the time. And he knows that in terms of autonomous, they're not going to let their technology in China. So he's got to find some ways to thread the needle, to continue to do business in China while he's still doing business in the US, Europe, and elsewhere. So you'll see how big China's market is growing. And you know, this is just so much. This is, again, I think now 8 times the size of ours in terms of electric vehicles. I spent a dinner talking to 25 AI companies. Helped Chris Thomas, a friend of mine who is worked at Intel a long time ago, helped to organize this with me. Below is all the guests. I'm not allowed to share everyone who was there, but it was 25 companies, Chinese companies. You might notice the colors. You might be aware of those colors. This was co-organized by the Stanford Graduate School of Business, because almost every single one of those AI entrepreneurs went to Stanford Graduate School of Business, even though every single one of them is Chinese. And the way that they're analyzing the market and the opportunities and who they collaborate with and do business is very global. Chinese high tech is impressive, but it crosses geographies. So the idea of a unique, standalone, self-reliant China is a myth. It doesn't exist, because the best and brightest in China are at the people-to-people level, the individual human level, the finance, the technology, the business. They are part of global markets. Pulling them apart is an impossibility. You have to pull individual people apart to do that. Chinese high tech faces enormous challenges, even though they've done really well, because they are being led by the government to invest in certain sectors and not in others. So Xiaomi, impressive, but again, as I said, the 151st electric vehicle company. So why would you want to be the 151st of anything? Well, you think it's a big market. There's massive subsidies. We keep counting subsidies, and in 2023, subsidies were about $45 billion in China, US dollars, for the EV industry. About 46 billion the year before. So even though the proportion of the subsidy rate that you get per car is going down, so they're selling so many cars, the Chinese government it's a lot of money for companies to get access to. And Xiaomi's hope is they sell other things, which gives them a large enough bank account that they hope they can withstand this brutal, what I call warring states period that China is now going through with all of these price cuts. And hope that they'll be one of the last ones standing after all of this bloodletting. But that's a serious danger of risking everything that you have in your company that you've worked on for several decades on this hope that you might be one of the last ones standing. You've also got significant technology restrictions imposed by Washington and Europeans and others. Those AI companies were super scared about the inability to access GPUs to do the type of number crunching that they need to do to build their large language models to compete and to market them to drive businesses. And so they're being denied that access, and so that will hurt them. So Chinese companies have lots of things that they're doing really well, but there's also severe constraints that they face. And so this brings me to the second half, and I just want to use a few minutes because I think probably the conversation would be as valuable as anything. So the first thing I notice is that Chinese tech is doing a lot better than it has been, but it still faces enormous challenges in what they're doing, because you get investments in certain places and not in others. You have certain kinds of restrictions that they face, and it's a very, very competitive environment and very, very challenging. But the second thing that I noticed that I took home from my trip from China, I'm making sure I was a burning hole in my chest, was how pessimistic everybody was everywhere I went. The level of despondence, of malaise, of fear about the future was as grim as I've seen China ever since I started going there. And this even was among some of the company executives that I talked to. But just every place I went, it didn't matter which city I went to. A decade ago, I did a survey of people's attitudes about life, just myself and my research assistant. And Wuhan stood out as optimistic compared to the other places I went to. They just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the revolution in Wuhan, the ROC, Republican Revolution, and they've gotten a ton of money, and maybe that's why they felt happier relative to others. This time I felt the same malaise every place I went. And people were really trying to make sense of what was going on, and deeply worried about the direction of the country internally, deeply worried about China's relationship with the rest of the world. And every place I went, people were sort of the conversation dominated by one question: why is the leadership not doing more to respond to people's loss of confidence? That question animates everybody. I was thinking about that before I went on this trip and started asking about it. And it's just like this thread that keeps getting pulled, and you get bigger and bigger thread. And I got 4 kinds of answers from people in response to that question. Why isn't he doing more? It's the number one question on people's minds. And I got these 4 answers, which I sum up as the 4 no's, the sugabu. The first answer that people gave me, these are hypotheses, because nobody knows, right? We're all guessing. It's as dark a black box as ever. So we're all just guessing, but everyone is guessing, right? But and they are really focused on this. So the first one is, he doesn't know. Tabu Zhidao. Xi Jinping does not know. He's kept in the dark because the people around him will not share credible, real information with him because they're scared to. The second hypothesis, he doesn't know what to do. It's got info, but you solve these problems. How do you solve local fiscal debt? How do you solve real estate problem? How do you get Chinese to have any children, let alone multiple children? How do you deal with really fixing the educational system? How do you fix the hukou system? Name a big problem that China has, and if you have an easy solution for it, go right ahead. All right, these are hard problems. In addition, look at the people working for him. These people stink. They're not the A team, they're not the B team, they're barely the C team, right? Most of them have the top leaders that work for him, the vice premiers and others, even the premier had no central leadership experience, right? They all owe everything to him, so they're there because of politics, not because of capability. And the party now runs everything, so all those folks in the government don't really, they're all just waiting for instructions. So people say, well, it could be that he knows, but he doesn't know what to do. Third option that people gave me, he doesn't care. Tabazai, he's Xi Jinping. He cares about national security, the Communist Party, himself. He lived in a cave. He was hired to not be Mikhail Gorbachev. And he's doing a really good job at that. He's not this, smartest guy. People criticize him all the time. You probably heard that people call him Winnie the Pooh. They don't call him Winnie the Pooh. We call him Winnie the Pooh. People in China call him Xiao Xuesheng, elementary school student, because he's got a PhD from Tsinghua, which based on a dissertation he probably didn't write. And people just don't think very highly of him. So he doesn't care. He spends if you got his daily calendar, how much time does you think he spends with folks like Barry Naughton and us talking about economics? Like maybe 1% of the time. Probably spends most of the time like, what do I do about Qin Gang? What do I do about Li Shangfu? What do I do about all of these issues? That's in the military, et cetera. That's probably how he spends most of his day. So it could be he just doesn't care. The fourth hypothesis people put forward is he doesn't agree. He actually thinks he's doing exactly what China should be doing with, as they say, changes unforeseen in 100 years, an international environment that's gone totally negative on China. Your primary suppliers of technology, markets, and finance have given you the middle finger and said we may supply some, but we may not. What do? You go self-reliance, right? Everyone says stimulus. Well, the last time you did that, you got a ton of debt. So you don't do that. Plus, you've got the rest of the world bearing down on you, and you better save every fund you can in case you need that later, rather than just trying to pump up the market now. So that's the logic. And then he goes, well, just look at my record. EV batteries, EVs, solar panels, wind turbines, C919 that competes with Boeing and Airbus, high-speed rail, subway cars, infrastructure, left and right. We're kicking ass. So 4 different kinds of views. People gave me all different kinds of answers. People that have worked a lot with the party and the center chose amongst all of them. Some people really think that he's being kept in the dark. Some people really think that this is a policy process that looks like not like a dictator running things in an efficient way, but the Obama administration that can never get anything done, that just talks around things forever. Some people really believe number 3, he doesn't care. If you landed on that, you typically were in your mid to late 70s. And it's because you had seen Mao in action, or you talk very historical about Xi Jinping. The plurality people land on number 4 because they think that this is an intentional plan. This is really how he thinks. And people who have had meetings with him are impressed by his self-confidence and his emphasis on technology and techno-nationalism. If it's the first 2, if it's he doesn't know or he doesn't know what to do, all you need to do is send him more reports and essays and articles from UCSD and CSIS, and he will go, oh, if I had only known, and here's the plan, we'll change. If it's the latter 2, there's nothing, it doesn't matter how much stuff we send him. This is it. This is the plan. The only thing that changes, that leads to change, is failure. Major, major, major failure, right? Either he would decide on his own, wow, I've failed, so I better change. He could try to do an LDP, like the LDP did in the early 60s, facing massive protests across Japan from strikes and co-opting the socialists. Other leaders could say goodbye to him and show him the door. Or the people could rise up and say, we don't like any of these folks. I don't think any, which of those three do you think are likely? I have a hard time seeing any of those three. So this looks like they're going to keep on going on this path for quite a long time. So we've got some extremely impressive, so try to tie this all together in the last second, is we've got extremely impressive technological capabilities, which Xi Jinping can point to. But also enormous amounts of waste and problems, and technology success, which is derived from collaboration with the rest of the world. So it looks to me like we are going to continue to see really significant individual examples of technology success, but a system which is also grinding its way along in a very inefficient way, increasingly slow. So what I call the fat tech dragon now, if I get to retitle this thing, I'd call it the slow tech dragon. I think that's where we could be for a long time. Really significant signs of technological breakthroughs and amazing things that will shock us, but enormous problems of a system that is got so many elements of dysfunction and problems to it, all at the same time. And I think that China has the ability to have those two things coexist for an extremely long period of time, because they have a lot of capability and resources, even though they have enormous weaknesses. And wow, that sounds a lot like another country I'm familiar with, that has enormous capabilities, but also enormous problems, which they can figure out how to muddle along for a very long time. So that's what I took away from my trip, and look forward to the conversation with everybody.
Have a seat.
Thanks.
So Scott, if I demand that you choose one of those four, which would you choose?
Oh, so this is always the next part of the conversation. And my typical answer is I want to hear what everyone else thinks first. Because I hate to be the one that said that, because when I was a professor, students would always be fishing for the quote unquote right answer. And I hate that. I tend to think that I lean towards number 2 and number 4 together. Number 4 for the trajectory of where they want to go, because I do think that he is a techno-nationalist, and I won't make a value judgment on his brain power, but I think that is his view of things is that you build a lot of shiny stuff, and it's good for your national security and for your economy. But I also push hard on number 2 in terms of the implementation, in that they really have a pretty bad team and a system that comes up with bad answers about how to achieve this techno-nationalist outcome. And just you hear people talk about incompetence all the time, and you just it's hard to see it from the outside, but it just looks like that they keep making mistakes, and that there are also some smart choices on the table which they for some reason just will not go toward, and I think this has to do with
Such as what?
Well, they could liberalize the hukou system and really get a boost in labor productivity and getting labor where it needs to, and giving these new urban residents enough comfort to feel that they could spend and consume. And I think that would boost the demand side of the economy quite a bit, without causing severe social dislocation, which they seem to fear. Anyway, so I'm a number 4, 2 and 4, and 4 and 2. I don't know. And how about you and others?
Well, why don't we just, I'm gonna
but anyway,
use my chair prerogative here to ask you one other set of questions and then we'll throw it open. So you really stress the openness of China's tech economy. And that was extremely interesting. I remember, Chalmers Johnson, who of course wrote the book on industrial policy in Japan,
yes,
and years ago used to point out that one of the crucial things about Japan at that time was how few foreigners there were anywhere in the system. He argued it was a closed system that was, more nationalists than it appeared. But you're telling us that the Chinese high-tech economy is actually much more open than we might think it would be, specifically in terms of their human interaction. So let me push you on that a little bit. Do these people, and I guess I'm especially thinking of these Stanford
yes.
business school grads heading these AI companies, do they feel that this crucial wellspring of technological progress, this openness and this technological international cooperation is fundamentally in danger today in China? And if it is it more in danger from the US or is it more in danger from the
Yeah, so I think I didn't think of the word openness. I just sort of the factual transnational nature of the places of Chinese technological success seems to me to just be a fact. And you just you come across it in some industries. It's more obvious than others. In commercial aircraft, there's a far fewer foreigners and collaboration. The foreigners that do work for Comac, for example, are basically kept in a ghetto. They don't have power to make decisions. They're kept in an office without and they're isolated from the rest of the company. But in these others, there's more obvious connectivity. The companies that have longevity in China are probably Chinese companies with political power, state-owned enterprises, and a few selected private companies. The sense I got from talking to those that I interviewed is they feel danger from both directions. One, the Chinese system might let them make money and take it all away at a moment's notice, or impose restrictions on their collaboration with the outside, and that the West will cut them off from technology as well. I spoke at the China Development Forum, which is sort of an annual ritual event for renewal of vows between the Chinese government and multinational businesses. And I go to kind of watch that renewal of vows occur. And they had a panel on AI, and I spoke at the end of the panel on AI, and it was about AI governance. So I came up with we were coming up with suggestions for what to say. And I wanted to say one thing that the US could do, one thing the Chinese could do on the unilateral front. So on the American unilateral front, I said the US should pass a national law around data privacy and data security. Not just pick company by company, but have a full system to do this. And that might reduce our anxieties about any individual company like TikTok or something. People thought, oh, that's a nice thing. I said for China, what you should do is just get rid of the Great Firewall. And
Good luck with that.
I have more faith. Any case, I explained self-interested reasons for China economically and politically, and how it wouldn't be a sacrifice of their national security if they did it in a certain way. And not a single person criticized me. I did get dragged off the stage. I didn't get kicked out of China. I didn't have to stay in China. And afterward, I got text messages from people in the audience, including officials, who said that was a great idea. So I think Chinese know that they're inside this walled garden, which is highly restrictive, that it is a huge detriment to them. And actually, I think getting rid of the Great Firewall would be the single most powerful policy signal the Chinese could give to restore confidence in China and the world's confidence. I think you would see a massive amount of increase in global capital going to China with that single step. And I can't think of anything else the Chinese government could do that would have that powerful a signal. Are they likely to do it? Again, 0.0001%. Am I willing to write reports suggesting that they should and have them thrown in the trash can? Yes.
That's great. Well, let's throw this open. We've got people maybe online, and let's take a first question from the floor. And I'm going to call on Susan because she doesn't really ask questions very.
This may be a very long question, but how did the Chinese people feel about the potential TikTok ban in US?
I think that in general, they are very angry with the US. And
Because we're doing what they're doing.
no, that's not what they said, but that's a good comeback. I think they just find the US. It proves that the US's goal is just simply eliminating Chinese successes. And here's a very successful company that 170 million Americans use, and therefore it needs to be. That's their explanation of it. They don't believe the US argument that it's about the US is worried about being having Americans brainwashed or having their data all go to the Chinese government. So pretty consistently, and many of them saw Shou Zichu's testimony before the Congress where he was attacked pretty harshly. And so they kind of, despite him being Singaporean, he's kind of a national hero for them. So that's a pretty widespread view.
You have an online question.
Yeah, we've got a couple of online questions. First one is from Ming Da Cho, who was asking sort of if you see a path reconciling the dilemma between China emphasizing security and the need to promote development and present China as investable. And then a question from Jeff Hoffman, who's a PhD student here at UCSD, asking about whether developing world markets are providing an increasingly viable outlet for Chinese high-tech exports as the West is starting to cut them off.
Sure. So on the first question, which comes from a former student here and a former researcher for myself, which is great to hear. I do think that national security is here to stay for a while as a central factor animating how policymakers think about how they govern their economies in its relationship with the rest of the world. And that affects the type of defensive measures they put in place, the type of industries that they try to support, how they collaborate or don't collaborate with others. And I don't think that we're going to easily move away from that unless somehow there's some miracle increase in mutual trust between the US and China. Or one side is quote unquote defeated, whatever the heck that means. And so I see this for a while. I do think, given that reality, the goal for those of us who write and watch about it and give advice is that there are smart ways to try and manage that, the tension between those two things, and try to reduce the friction between those two goals and address reasonable national security goals while also keeping in mind your economics. You can't just emphasize only one and not the other, and you can't always see the two are always in conflict. There are ways in which you can adopt smart policies to promote the two. I actually think interdependence in many ways helps on national security grounds. And I think part of what we need to do is help policymakers think about the upsides of interdependence in the national security benefits it provides to us in ways that are stabilizing. And so, for example, most folks in Washington, and I think in Beijing, think in terms of generational technologies, who is ahead in absolute terms in one technology or other. I think another alternative framework has to do with ecosystems. Whose architectures are we in? And so in the first measure, you can see China coming up. The US is at 4 nanometers, the Chinese are at 14 nanometers. It's that kind of thing. But if you look at whose architecture we're in NVIDIA's architecture, right? We're in ASML's architecture. And it really doesn't matter whether the Chinese are at 7 and 6 or we're at 4, you want to worry about architecture. So it's Qualcomm's world, it's Microsoft's world. Those are the things that are most important. And having China in those worlds is value for us. And they should also be thinking about that as well. There's other ways that we ought to figure out how to square the circle on those two things. So, and try to, the way we're headed is in a direction which is in which we're gonna end up with those two things at severe loggerheads. Is the rest of the world's markets good enough to replace the US and Europe, or just the US? They're growing markets, but they're not big enough. They're not first mover markets. They're not where you test your products first and establish dominance. They're not where you develop the most critical partnerships. That's the US, Europe, and China now. Those are the places where you really have to focus. And so those markets should receive a great deal of attention, but they're not quote unquote substitutes in my.
I have plenty of questions, so if people are gonna hesitate a little, let me first ask a question, and I'll turn it back to the audience. You talked about these EVs have these very, Tesla has this sort of austere interior. Very good, very good operating system, but the experience is austere. And I guess Xiaomi and the others have a much more luxurious. Did you find yourself swooning for the experience of driving this Xiaomi? You said you tried it out and you enjoyed it. Were you sold?
They are impressive. I got in an EV in Beijing one night, and I thought it was a Tesla because it had Apple Play going in it. And then they said, "Oh no, this is that Wenjie," and and so they are cool. I still like cup holders. Cup holders are really. I have three boys, so we need places, and also, but you need power, charging jacks and stuff like that. That stuff really matters. I think actually the look and the feel of the experience to Chinese consumers.
You're not quite answering my question.
But would I buy it?
Yeah.
So I think this is a question that, so I'm not ready to buy an EV, let alone a Chinese EV yet, because I still have range fear. I still don't know what they're, for not just that, but how long the battery will last. Like how long can I have this go? We in my family tend to keep cars a really long time. I have a Sienna minivan, which I drove out here and used here when I was studying here, when I was teaching here in 2005. We still have the thing. It's 245,000 miles. So I'm not.
And you're disqualified.
Yeah. Good.
In your conversations, did overcapacity come up?
Yeah.
There was overhang. To follow up this a bit, about 10% of the domestic demand worldwide, but about a third of the productive capacity. And those companies that are chasing new technology also have to be thinking about amortizing their costs. So they got to be generating income.
Yes.
What did you see?
Yeah. So this was, so every company that I talked to said that this is a problem, but they're not the source of the problem. It's their competitors is the source of the problem. And many of them argue that they will be the ones to grab market share and sales to be able to deal with this cash flow problem and still be there down the road. Xiaomi was the best example of that, but I heard it from others. It is a genuine, it's a challenge because China's political economy, policy making machine does very well on the supply side, and it just can't mandate consumption across the board. It can amongst certain segments of a market, like for government procurement or certain kinds of businesses, but especially state-owned ones, or some markets have very stable demand, like in healthcare, where you can do that. But for hospitals, for example, medical equipment. But for anything that's consumer related or whatever, the Chinese just don't want to spend right now. That they're spending. The only way they're really spending now is by traveling, but otherwise they're holding their money They're worried about the next problem. Also, their money is locked up in an asset that's of unclear value. 70% of their money is in housing, right? So you have to unlock that. So that's a problem for all of them. From Chinese policymakers' perspective, the folks who have the power to generate the supply, like in those bureaucracies and the leadership and are funding this, just believe that they need to fund and they will absorb the losses, or they'll get someone to absorb the losses. The folks in the ministries of finance, commerce, and others that have to then talk to the rest of the world and defend themselves, they know that they're making a difficult argument. And they make arguments like, well, we're a market economy. We have comparative advantage in this stuff. We're better at it. You guys should just buy it. And you're like, really? You really believe that? Or if they're saying, well, if you're upset, go to the WTO. Yeah, that's who's going to the WTO. No one's going to the WTO because it's 3 years before you get the first verdict and 5 years before you get an appellate body decision. And of course, the appellate body is not even working. So they're not going to do. I asked them about the US-Japan solution from the 80s and 90s, which were voluntary export restraints, right? Where the Japanese constrained exports of semiconductors and cars. They said, oh, no, we're not going to do that. So it looks like what we're heading for, either across the board imposition of restrictions or product by product.
Yeah. Yes.
Would you say that China's technological economic success is more because of the authoritarian regime or in spite of it?
Good question. You stumped it.
Well, it does have this system does have ability to amass and direct resources. And that is obviously very valuable. And and of course, because it's a unitary system, and they have an easier ability to implement that across the country. I don't know if it's so much the authoritarian versus democratic that matters as much as is a unitary system, as much as they have been able to impose capital controls, and so they can direct capital, they can collect capital, and they can push it where they want it. So that helps out, and also they've just done a lot of fundamentals, right? I mean, the education system, infrastructure, all those things actually do matter. So it may less be it's partly the industrial policy machine, but I also just give credit to doing like some basics that really matter. And I don't know if it's some people have analyzed Chinese success across industries, and there's industrial policy in many of them, but those industries that have more private companies where there's more open to international competition tend to do better in terms of profits and productivity. So industrial policy needs, the context matters quite a bit.
Scott, I'm sorry, we have to cut this off. We have a strict time limit. We always end right on the hour, and the hour has run. So I just want to thank everybody for coming and mention that for the next public lecture on May 8th, which is 6 days from today, we have Nathan Mabubi from the University of Pennsylvania. He's going to talk about legal developments that are coming up in China. So please join me in thanking Scott Kennedy.